This is Mr. Houghton, and he'll introduce himself.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Steve Houghton. Um, Happy to visit with Bond today. I've had my own businesses for 25 years. I've been in finance and real estate, and had a payments company that I sold about a year ago, and so I've done a variety of things.
Mr. Houghton, can you justify doing business with countries that commit human rights violations or are notorious for doing so?
I think can it be justified? I think under certain circumstances, absolutely it can be. I think that you have to be careful with any time you start justifying. I think that it's important that you carefully consider what your values are and the reasons that you're justifying it. People have an amazing ability to justify anything that is in their self-interest, to justify if they're not careful. However, I think there are reasons why you benefit people. I was just in Vietnam the last couple of weeks, and that's a country that is a communist country. The government has done atrocious things, but in '94 it was opened up to the world for trade, and so it's an interesting paradox when you go over there, because they're a communist country in theory, and yet there's private property ownership, and it's a capitalistic, growing economy, and it is capitalism that is doing that. And the day will come in our lifetime, I believe in my lifetime, certainly in your lifetime, that the communist government as we know it today in Vietnam will be gone. And it won't be because of human rights protesters. It will be because of capitalism, and because these people have had an opportunity to have the freedom to keep what they earn, and that's a powerful, powerful engine. And as I was over in Vietnam, it was interesting thinking about, we lost that war with bullets and bombs. We lost. Communism beat us, and yet ultimately we won the war, because we bankrupted the Soviet Union during Reagan's term by spending only 5% of our GNP on military. The Soviets had to spend 50% of GNP to try and keep up, and it bankrupted them. And so we want to spread capitalism. And so if you said, I'm not going to do business with any country that is corrupt, or any country that has human rights violations, well, you're not going to help those people dig themselves out. But by the same token, I think you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. I think there's certainly a lot of instances where you may not do that. But I think you have to think carefully, and you have to be grounded in your values, but you also need to think in a clear-headed way about what the consequences are, for good or bad.
Do you fear competitors will disregard moral and ethical conflicts in order to lower prices or maximize profits? Have you seen this happen before?
I don't fear that. I know it will happen. I mean, that is business, and for as long as the world has been in existence, lying and cheating and killing, those are all things that are unfortunately the dark side of human nature. And so, yeah, that happens. But that doesn't make it okay for you and I to compete that way. And I think that in the long run, you don't have to do those kinds of things to be successful in the United States. I mean, we're really, really fortunate that we have a system of laws. If somebody gets rich in the United States, it's usually because they had a great idea or they worked really hard. That happens in Russia, somebody's rich in Russia, they probably stole something, and there's, I mean, it's a, I don't want to make blanket assertions, but it's much tougher over there, and so we're fortunate to live in the environment and have the structure in our country that allows that. But we should strive to spread those ideals. But it's like when you teach a child, to walk. Initially, they can't even crawl, but you cheer when they start to crawl, and you encourage them to crawl, and then you help them, and when they start to move holding on to something, you cheer and you encourage them, and that continues. It's a progression. And our country, if you look back in the 19th century, our labor standards were very different than they are today. There's a progression, and so you can't, if you're only going to cheer a child when they walk perfectly or run perfectly, they may not get there, because you have to work incrementally.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever had the opportunity to do business with a corrupt government or business, or notoriously corruptible government or business?
Yeah. You don't have to go. You don't have to leave the country to do that.
Right.
I mean, I've done business deals with people in Dallas, and corruption is worldwide, and it may look a little bit differently. It may be more pervasive other places, mm-hmm. But it's important to have clear agreements going into things, and to do all you can to protect yourself.
Do you feel uncomfortable with that, even though you have the clear agreements? But
sure, yeah. I don't like to do that, and if I can avoid it, I will avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would rather. I mean, that's a broad question. There's a lot of different scenarios. I could give you examples where I would say, no, I'm not going to do business. I'll walk away. I can give you examples where I may, know that somebody is. I would not do a joint venture.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't do something where my ethics would be compromised
mm-hmm.
or tarnished. But if you're buying something,
right?
If you'll only buy cars from an honest car salesman, you may have a hard time.
Yeah.
And so, again, there's this big gradation. I would encourage you as a young potential businessman to really think carefully about your ethics, and to create your own constitution of, if you will, of things that you will and you won't do, and write it down and be real clear, because there are lots of ethical dilemmas that are just a part of business, and it's important to think clearly about those things and not get on a slippery slope where in 20 years you find yourself as a crook. That's one of the most important things when you go into business. You're going to need to think clearly and set standards for yourself. And I would encourage, in fact, I've encouraged my older kids to create their own board of directors, if you will. Company has a board of directors. CEO runs the company, but he has a board of qualified people that counsel the CEO on decisions. And so in your life, you are the CEO of your life. And I would encourage you to come up with a board of directors. You don't need to call them that, but that's really what they are. People you respect, people you admire, and people who care enough about you that they will tell you the truth and take the time to mentor and counsel you, even when maybe it's hard to. And they'll tell you the truth even if it's not something you want to hear. And then you take that counsel from different parties and you weigh it out and you make decisions. And I think it's a good way to, whether it's corporate governance or governing yourself. I think it's, and coming up with a standard of ethics. I remember early on when I first started in business, talking to somebody that I really admired, the concept of am I honest? And integrity is something that's always been important to me. But I'm in business. You're always negotiating. And I asked this person, and he was late in his career, but I asked him about that. How do you keep your? And I gave him the example. I'm leasing space for Trammell Crow, and people ask me, well, what's your best price? And I know that our back is against the wall, and we really need to lease this, and we might lease it for $4 a square foot if we have to, but we think we can get $5.
Mm-hmm.
So am I lying if I tell them, well, I think $5's as good as you can do? And he put it in perspective. He said, Steve, there are things that you clearly have an obligation for, and there are things that are none of their business. And if they ask you, does this building have asbestos, or is it environmentally tainted, that's material for them to know and make a decision
Right.
on, and you have an obligation to disclose that. But he said, you have an obligation to Trammell Crow. They are paying you to lease their buildings, and you have an obligation to get the highest price you can without lying, cheating, or stealing. But if somebody asks you, if you ask them what's the most you'll pay, do they have an obligation to tell you? Mm-hmm. No, that's part of the dance of negotiations. And so that's one of those things that's none of their business. And so anyway, that's an example for me in my life of where I felt like I had an ethical dilemma, and how someone older and more seasoned that I respected was able to put it in perspective. And it's been really simple and clear to me since then.
Thank you very much.